just so that we can be on that same page. So we're going to create a light for our scene. In your scene, you should focus on these 3 lights: area light, spotlight, or the regular light. The regular light, you can refer to it as like a point light. It basically comes from a single spot and emanates outward, okay? Depending on what you want to do with it. So for my scene, I have a lampshade over here. That's what I showed last time. I'm going to add a regular light and just move it into the lampshade. Okay, so I just move the regular light right into the lampshade. There it is. And then I'm going to go set up some of the settings for it. Now, like I said before, there's like a trillion settings, but we only touch on a certain couple, okay? One of them is going to be like the color. So if you go home today and you look at your light bulbs, you may notice that some have a blue, some have a white, some have like a yellow tint to them. So you may want to adjust that there. We also have the intensity. So is it a night light or is it a full-blown like regular light bulb? Shadow, obviously we want some sort of shadow, so I'll just set this to a soft shadow. And then visible light, remember this, we only need to put this on if we actually want to see a light inside that. I don't in this case, so I'm just going to leave it like it is. Then I need to adjust the shadow, let's say, so I go to the shadow properties, and then I can adjust it. Now before I adjust it, I'm going to hit Control R, or this guy, and that will give me my lighting, okay? Now I'm actually getting some other stuff happening in my scene because I have some other stuff set up. Let me just turn off my other lights that are inside here. There we go. There we go. Okay. So here is my regular light. I can take the density down. And now I'll get some more light here. So this is the density of my shadows are turned down. So then I get that. Ignore the glow on these pictures. Cool. So that's it. That's all I had to do for the one light. Now, the rest of the room looks kind of dim. I need to add another light to do that. Okay. Every lighting setup, every scene is pretty much the same thing. I'm going to add an area light, and the area light will fill in the rest of it. So I'm just going to make this big area light. I'm going to rotate it. There we go. I'm not going to add shadows to that one because I don't want to blow out my entire scene. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so all I did was add an area light. If I need to, I can click on that light, go to the General tab, and increase the intensity of the light if I need to. But you have to be careful that you don't blow it out just like I did. Too much. Okay, so 100 in this case works. And again, I don't want to add shadows because when you add shadows, sometimes you just have like competing shadows in your scene and it's like way too much stuff. Okay, so I don't need the extra shadows in here. The shadows from the one light work perfectly fine. Cool. Alright, so that's the lights. I added a point light, I added an area light, that's it. Now for coloring this stuff, I want to add colors to all of this. So I'm just going to delete all my colors that I currently have, and then delete all this information from here. There we go. Cool. So I don't think I have any materials. I still have some there. I'm just going through and just deleting all the material stuff that I had. I don't need to do that. I'm just doing it so that they're not there and it doesn't bother me. Okay. So when we add a material down here in this bottom left area, that's where we can create a material. Okay. It's as simple as just double clicking and we get a material. All right. Now materials are definitions, right? You ever been to the fabric store? I'm there all the time. Just kidding. But if you look, they have fabric all over the place. And some fabric is like super smooth, some is really sticky, some has bumps on it, some has whatever. That's what we're doing, is creating a material definition for our stuff. So if I take this guy here and I drop it on a bookshelf and I make that look like leather, anything I drop this onto will look like leather. Okay? So if I wanted my chair to be leather, I drop it on there and the entire thing would be leather. If I wanted it to look like paper, I make it look like paper, and then anything I drop it onto looks like paper. That's the idea with these, okay? And if I change this one thing here, it changes all the stuff that is applied to that, All right. So over here on the right, that's where we're going to be editing our stuff. So again, we have a color, so we can choose a color. So if I wanted just like green, sure, we'll go with green. We have brightness of that color, so we go from black to green. And then let me drop it on here. So I'm just going to take this color and just drop it onto one of my bookcases. So you'll see how now my bookcase has that green color. And if I go back to this material and I start to tweak the color, it'll tweak what that one looks like. If I put this on two objects, I go back to the material and tweak the color, it'll tweak what that material looks like. Okay? So essentially what we're trying to do is recreate what these things look like in a material, and then we can apply it to different objects so it looks like that. All right? So most of the time a flat color doesn't cut it. For now, you can apply it to certain items and just leave it as a flat color. Like I can apply this. Oops, my wall is locked. Let me unlock my wall layer. There we go. And I can drop it on my wall. Ooh, fancy. Let's lock that back up. And go back to attributes. Okay. So now if I click back on here and I change it, you'll see that it still affects the wall even though the wall layer is locked. All right. So let's say I'm just going to give my wall a flat color. Something like this, something like this. You can go to Home Depot, pick out your colors if you want. There we go, that's good enough. Okay, so there's my wall. So now I want to give the bookcases obviously a different color because it's too similar. So before I do that, I'm going to make sure I name this material. So if I go to this, I go to my basic tab, and I give this a name, wall paint. Okay, whatever we want to call it. So now this just has, like I said, a flat color to it. I'm going to double click and add a new one. This new one I'm going to call bookshelf wood. Bookshelf wood. Okay. So I'm going to go under color. Now here's where there's no, like, what color is wood, right? Woods are multitude of colors. It's not just like brown or yellow or gold. There's a multitude of colors that make wood look like wood, right? You have grain and whatever else. So I can't pick a flat color for this. If I come down here, though, you see where this says texture? Most items inside of your scene, you will add a texture to it. If you go to the arrow, it pulls up this menu, and these are all different kinds of textures you could add to it to make it look like stuff. Now, inside here, there is one called wood. We're not going to use that one. We're going to bring in our own wood. So I'm going to go to load image. And what I've done is I've gone to a website called textures.com. And I've waited because I'm on McCombs Network. I've waited for about 3 years. I took a nap, grabbed lunch, went to a movie. I saw Titanic in the extended cut. And Lord of the Rings, all three of them.
Do you know they're rebuilding the Titanic?
Are they? That's crazy.
Why don't you use Chrome?
You can try to use Chrome. Sometimes they don't like to work. I think maybe if I stop this, if I hit that, oh yeah, it's not responding. Just recover it. That'll help. There we go. So now it's going to decide to go there. So what textures.com is, once it loads, is it's a texture resource. So basically, if you need a picture of wood or metal or plastic or cement or animal feathers or whatever, they have texture resources for it, okay? Come on, you're killing me. There we go. Chrome is a lot quicker, whatever. Sometimes Chrome does not work, and we have to use the other one. So this is textures.com. You register for it, and then you're able to download 15 images a day, or 15 credits worth of images a day. So if you needed like wood, you can go down to the wood section and you can search for different kinds of wood. And again, depending on what item you're texturing, you have to find appropriate materials or appropriate images. So if I'm doing a bookshelf, I wouldn't choose bamboo or burned. That wouldn't make any sense. I wouldn't choose the ends of the wood. That doesn't make sense. I would go with like a fine wood, okay? But they have other stuff like here's logs, here's planks, here's reinforced, here's plywood. Okay, if this is like a wood shop and I want to show here's some raw woods, I can use something like plywood for a bookshelf, and they will look like more of a raw bookshelf. Or maybe I have some rough strewn wood laying in the corner. That's where I could use the rough area. If I'm doing a tree, there's tree bark. Okay, so when you find a texture you like, you go to there, you log in, and then you find obviously something that's appropriate. Again, a parquet floor is not appropriate for a bookshelf. Fine wood is. Some of these too, like this one, if I go to the little magnifying glass, that doesn't work. If I go to the magnifying glass on these, this is like a flooring. Okay, so again, not appropriate for a bookshelf, but further down, something like this, something like this, something like that could be appropriate for a bookshelf. Okay, so I download that image and I put it inside of my, here's my Miniroom folder. I made that textures folder, and I drop my textures inside here. So any images that I want to use, I download them and drop them into the textures folder. So here's a wood texture that I got before. I'm going to hit open. It says, do you want to copy it? I'm going to say no. Okay, because I know where it is. It's in the right spot. So now here is that texture. So same process. I grab this wood, I drop it onto my bookshelf, and there it is. Okay. Now looking at this, you can see that it actually created like a weird pattern all over the place. Okay. When we have a flat 2D image and we're applying it to a 3D object, the software needs to figure out some way to take this flat image and put it onto a 3D object. So what happens behind the scenes is every 3D object we have has some sort of representation of what it looks like flattened out. Okay, this one here is not doing a very good job based off of how we created it and did other stuff to it. So I need to fix that. So when we add a material to an object, like this bookshelf, there we go, you'll see that Cube 7 has this, oops, I can delete these are the old ones. Cube 7 has this little bookshelf texture tag right on it. And when I click on this, I get options for how to control that texture on that 3D object. Okay? So the way I do it is under this projection, I change it from spherical to, nope, not that one, to, where'd it go? There it is, cubic. Okay? And once I drop it in as cubic, it lays it out pretty good. It's not perfect. It doesn't look realistic, but it does look better. Okay? Now what cubic does, these projections here are taking that image and somehow putting it on there. If I switch this to a flat, you'll see that the sides of this are actually laid out pretty decent, but everything else looks like streaky. Okay? Anytime we do a projection, think of just like the projector, it's taking that flat image and it's projecting it. If I took this pad of paper and I hold it up to this, like that, there we go. You can see a perfect image on it, right? But if I was to look at it here or there, I wouldn't see that image because the projection literally can't match to that side. So that's what flat's doing, is it's like one projector shooting the image out. When we switch this to cubic, we have multiple projections. So if we had our pad of paper here, one projector would be shooting it from the front, one would be hitting it from the side, one would be hitting it from the top, and that's how it would lay out the texture for it. So that's why in this case it works out pretty good, that it looks pretty nice. You know, we see the grain in there. Okay? Now if I drop this onto a new object, you'll see that the new object still doesn't look good. Okay? Every object we do, we have to specify this is how I want you to lay it out. So I would click on the other object here, change this from spherical to cubic, and there we go. Drag this to the new object, change it from spherical to cubic, and there we go. Now this applies to everything. So if I assign this to my chair, I make it cubic, there we go. I apply this to my desk, make that cubic. Okay. Now we typically don't want to have the same material on everything because that looks pretty horrible. All right. So what I can do is I can take this material and hold down the control key and just drag it over. That gives me a copy. So now I can do things to this one and change it to how it looks. So if I just go back by this material and I click on this, click the little dots, grab this other wood image that I have, no, and then I can drag this, let's say the chair, and this, okay? Now when I did that, I drug those to the chair and back to the table. There, where are they at? You'll see that it has two textures on here, okay? So it's still showing the old one is connected, and it's still showing that the new one is connected. But I still have to go to say this is cubic, click that one, this is cubic. And then the texture will be laid out a bit nicer, okay? Cool. So I could download 50 different wood textures, make a new material for each one of those, okay? Now there's other stuff that's going to go into this. Let me hit Control R to render this. You'll see that the wood does have a bit of a shine to it. You can see up here there's a bit of a shine where the wood is not as the same color. If I go to these bookshelves here, some of these other tabs we can play with in order to adjust what these things look like. So one of them is reflectance, okay? And with this, I'm just going to play with the default here. And you can see that I can pull this up or pull it down. And what that's doing is controlling the shininess of it. All right? So as I pull this really far down and then I render this out, okay, the shine from this one is now gone. So some objects will have some dullness, some objects will have some brightness. For now, that's as deep as you need to go into it. Okay? We'll get further into each one of these, but that's as deep as we need to go for that. Now let's pretend too that this desk, you know, it looks kind of old, and you can see that there's a bunch of pits that are right here. Let's say I needed to make this look like it was pitted. Let's pretend that this is an old wood. It actually has some pits to it. It's not like a polished wood. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make it look bumpy. If I hit the render button, you'll see that it kind of looks like there's some bumps there, but it's not really interacting with the light correctly. As in, there's some shininess here, but that same shininess exists in the shadows, which is kind of weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my bookshelf, and I'm going to go to the basic tab. There we go. And under the basic tab, there's this thing called a bump. And what the bump allows me to do is take a item that's flat and make it look like it's bumpy. Okay? So I'm going to click on the bump, and then you'll see that I get a new tab that says bump. And it basically says, well, where do you want it to be bumpy? I don't know where you want this thing to be bumpy at. So I'm going to go to my color. I'm going to go to my arrow. I'm going to copy, where at? Copy channel. I'm going to go to my bump. I'm going to go to the arrow. I'm going to go to paste channel. And right when I do that, and then I render this, you're going to see that that bump is actually a bit deeper. Okay, and I can really enhance it if I take the strength up to 100. You'll really see that this is now a lot grainier, a lot bumpier. Okay, probably at 20 it was actually really good. Yeah, that's probably good like that. Okay. Now, when I did that to this material, because the chair also has that assigned, it did it to the chair too. So I don't need to add it to the chair because the chair already has the bump. And just so you can kind of see that even clearer, let me also take this reflectance. I gotta pull this up a little bit more. There you go. I'm gonna go over here to this, and we'll see. If I render this, you can see how smooth this looks, how smooth that looks. I'll go to the bookshelf, I'll go to color, I'll copy the channel, go to basic, go to bump, and then I'll paste that channel. There you go. So now you can see it looks like there's a bit more tooth to it, a little bit more grain. It feels like it actually has like some sort of texture to it, especially right in there. Okay. Now what this does is it actually takes our black and white values, so something that is super dark like black, there's no bump to it. Something that's white gets bumped out to here. And then all the gray values in the middle get kind of like bumped at their interval. All right. Now there's no black and white, but the software will interpret this color image as a desaturated image. Cool. All right, so let's do some other stuff. So let's take my lampshade. Let's texture that. So I'm going to double click, and I will call this material lampshade. Drop this onto my lampshade. Now with this one, I'm just going to add a color to it. I'm just going to go to color. Oops. And do that. Okay. Now it doesn't really look like this is glowing at all. It looks like it's just yellow and there's a light behind it. So under my basic area, I can adjust things like transparency. So if I go to transparency now, I'm going to come down to I'm missing it. Where are you at? Right here. This refraction. Oops, let me adjust the other one first. If I pull the brightness off, you'll see there's no transparency. Okay, I pull the brightness up. The more I pull it up, the more transparent it gets. Okay, so if I render this, you'll see that it looks like it's just transparent and just basically it's completely see-through. It doesn't really look like glass or anything or a lampshade really. It just looks kind of see-through. Okay, so I may want to find like a good value here, like maybe that's good. I could also add some refraction. So let's pretend that this is actually like a glass lampshade for some reason. And I'm going to pull the reflection or the brightness up a lot. So now what's happening is it's actually distorting the image underneath it. So as we see through this lampshade, instead of seeing straight through it to the wall, we're seeing into it, and then it's kind of bending the image, and then we're seeing the other side. So if you ever seen like a you have a glass of water and you put a straw in it and the straw looks like it's like separated in the water, that's what's happening here. Okay, so the more refraction that we have, the more bend is going to happen there. So for a lampshade, obviously this wouldn't have any bend because it's a lampshade, but just to kind of see the point, you can see how now that image back there is really distorted. I put it back to 1 and we're just seeing straight through it. Okay, so again, well, something we'll play with as we go. For now, I'm just going to kind of pull it down to like that. That's good. And then I could also turn on the luminance. Yeah, I can also turn on luminance and then give this a color here. Okay, so let's say I did green. Okay, now what luminance will do is regardless of how many lights are in the scene, it'll still brighten it up. Okay, so if I just turned off my lights and render, oops, let me turn on one light and render. Oh, wrong one. There we go. You'll see that this kind of glows without the luminance on here. It's very difficult to see the color of this thing. So I could make it that color and brighten it up a bit and then render it, and then we'd be able to see that a little bit more and make it appear that it's actually like a little bit brighter than it is. I could also go to my transparency and give this a bit of color. And I'll make it a horrible color just so you can see what it's going to do. All right, so by me giving this this horrible green color, what's happening is my shadows are now tinted to that horrible green color. Okay, the light goes into it and it bleeds that color off onto the wall. So now I can put it to an appropriate color just so we can see it. Come on. Oh, hit OK. Render. There we go. So now that actually has a little bit of a tint on it. Okay? So lots of different things that we can do to make something look appropriate. Here's my trash can. Let's go and add something to that. This is going to be like a black plastic. Okay, so I'll drop this onto here. Go to the color. I'll make this like a dark black as opposed to a light black. There we go. So there's our dark black trash can. Now it looks pretty flat. Okay, so what I can do is I can add to this color or add to this material to make it look a little bit fancier. So if I go to my basic, I go to my bump, and I go to the texture, there's a noise that's inside here. And what the noise is just this like neat pattern of noise. Okay, so now it looks really wavy and blobby. I'm going to pull that down some. I'm also going to go to my scale, oops, my noise, and then adjust the scale of this. Okay, so as I shrink this scale down, there we go. Now what we're starting to do is get this the idea that the black plastic trash can is not a smooth black, but it's actually made of plastic, and you can see the little bits of grain all the way around it. I can also adjust the coloration, so maybe it's not black and white, maybe it's just like that, so it's not as bumpy even further. There we go, that looks nice. Now this is just the bump that I'm adjusting, so it's not adjusting any of the color. I can go back to the black plastic, back to the color, and make this whatever color I want. I can make it green, and it'll still have green, but it'll have that like plasticky feel to it. I'm gonna go to the bump and just bump that up a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so to get back to the noise, I click on the noise, and it takes me here. And then I could adjust again that scale. I could also adjust the kind of noise that it is. All of these kinds of things are different noise patterns. So they're really cool ways just to add some detail to something without having to need an extra texture. So like dense, there we go. So now it looks different than it did a second ago when we had the other one. Here's fire. I don't know what that's going to do. Not much. The scale is so far down, we're not really seeing a whole lot inside there. Right? And then we also want to look at this from kind of further away. Yeah, so something like that could work for our trash can, even though it's fire. We'll just leave it at dense. There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to take this material and I'm going to duplicate it. So I hold Control and drag it. We'll call this screen. Okay. So now here's where we're going to get a little bit more advanced, because I want to take this color and just put that back to being black. I'm going to drop it onto here. That's cool. And I'm going to drop it onto my screen. All right. Now because of the noise pattern on here, you'll see that we do get some streaking here and there. We didn't see that on the trash can because the trash can had a pretty good idea of how to lay that out, how to flatten it. It doesn't know how to do that to the screen or to this. So what I'm going to do is click on them. Where are you at? There it is. So click on them and set this to be cubic. Click on the other one and set that to be cubic. There we go. All right. Now I think that noise pattern needs to be brought down just a smidge. So back to bump, back to noise, take the scale down. That looks better. All right, now obviously the screen doesn't make sense being plastic. The screen should be either a flat black smooth thing so that we, just see a flat screen, or we have a picture in there which would obviously make, more sense and more interest to the scene. So I'm going to double click. I'm going to create a new material, and I'm going to load an image. Okay, and the image is just going to be this. I have this landscape that I downloaded from that same website, from Textures. Now if I were to drag this onto the screen, it just overwrites it. So the entire thing gets that same landscape just for fun. There it is. Okay, that doesn't help us. So what I need to do is I need to assign it just to the faces of this. So if I switch to face mode and I select the face, there it is, and then I drag this onto that, you'll see that it assigns it just to the face. So we still have the black plastic out here, but now we have that landscape. And if we come over to this, you'll see here's the cube, there's the black plastic, there's the landscape, and then we have this little triangle. That triangle is a saved selection. So what it's doing is it's saying, okay, you selected the screen, I'm going to save that and put it over here. Then anything that you need to have a special, a special material assigned, it goes to that flag. Okay. Now, if I click on this, you'll see that the selection is polygon selection 1. That's what that is. Okay. So if this goes away, then it doesn't work, and it gets assigned to the entire screen. But if that's on it, and I can just drag this right here, then it's just on that one object. Okay, or that one piece of it. So I still need to control this and say, it's cubic. There we go. And now we have a little screen happening, which is awesome. We can also adjust what this looks like. Down here on the bottom, once we have this kind of placed using Cubic, we can start to play with the placement of it using that. So if I needed to, for whatever reason, let's say I did the offset. Okay, see how I can scroll through, and basically it's a repeating pattern. So as I scroll this one image to the bottom, it shows me the other one. As I keep zooming me out. As I scroll this way, it goes the other way. Yeah, I don't know what key I'm hitting here. I can change the length of it. I can change the tiles. So the more tiles that I have here, you can see I'm getting basically repetitions of that same texture if I needed something like that. Okay, so right now it's actually placed pretty good, so I don't need to touch it, so it's good. Let's render this. There we go. Okay, so now that looks okay. We could have this be a little bit fancier looking, because if this is a screen, we probably should see some light coming off of the screen. That would make a little bit more sense. So if I go to that material, remember we have this luminance here that we can pipe stuff into. We can control things through that. So if I go to my texture and I copy this image, I go to my luminance, I paste that image, that channel in there, and then we render it out, we have that. Now, it's still not showing anything crazy, right? Like, it still looks pretty much the same. But if I go to my color, or my basic, I can go to glow. And then this is going to blow it out. Yep, too bright. So then we take our radius up. Okay, then we take the strength down. So maybe it's like 30 and 70. There you go. It's subtle, right? So you can see there's a little bit of glow there. I'm gonna increase this just so you can see it better. 150. Okay. So now I've increased that glow. So now it appears it's not actually doing anything, but it appears that this thing is actually giving off some light, and it's kind of lighting up the area around it, just because we have that glow on there. All right. Cool. That worked. What else? All right. I can do the same thing with these picture frames. So let's say these picture frames here. Bookshelves, picture frames. Oh, I'm not in object mode, that's why I didn't select it. There, there, there. And I have some picture frames on this wall too. Yep. I'm going to assign the black plastic to them. So you'll see how I selected all, and then I drug it on one, and it automatically assigned it to all of them. Okay, so it's an easier way than doing it one at a time. And then I'm going to go and grab an image. Okay, so let me go here, and I'll get a picture of a bird. There we go, flamingo. And I'm going to use 1 credit to get the smaller one. I'm going to right click, show in the folder. There he is. So I'm going to move him to my 2510, work, Miniroom, textures, paste. Okay. So now I'm going to make a new material. I'll call this bird picture. Go to color. Instead of clicking this, I can just click that, and it'll automatically pop open my folder. So it's just a simpler way to grab it. Do not copy. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to faces. I'm going to grab all these faces here. Now, I'm not obsessed with flamingos enough to have the same picture of the flamingo on all these pictures, but just for fun, that's what we're doing. And then we set these to UVW. Now, that only set it on the first one, which is this one. Oops, not UVW, cubic. Sorry, there we go. On this one. So I still have to go through each one of these. I don't think it'll let me do that. Maybe it will. Yes, it will. Okay. And set all of them to cubic. There we go. And so now I have that flamingo picture on all of my walls. I also have to grab all of these and set all of these to be cubic 2 because my plastic on the frames was not turning out nice. Okay. Now if I get to here, I'm going to render it real quick. All right. If I decided this plastic was maybe too thick, too thin, whatever, I could adjust it here too using that same tile, same length. If they were too small, I could shrink it down. Too big, I could make it bigger, smaller. All right. So cool. So now I've assigned my materials. So all my materials down here, oops, I didn't label this one, so I'm going to go back and label this as landscape screen. There we go. Yep, everything else here is good. Okay. So I've added my lights, I've added my materials. So now what I want to do is animate inside the scene. So all we're doing is just animating a camera moving from one spot to another spot. That's all we're doing. Nothing fancy, just one spot to another spot. Down here at the bottom, this is our timeline. Oops, I'm already in a camera right now. Let me delete that camera so it doesn't confuse anyone like me. Delete that. Okay, so this is our timeline on the bottom. And the way that it works is we set a keyframe at one point, we set a keyframe at another point, and Cinema will animate in between. Okay. So the first thing I need to do is set 120 frames. Okay, so I put 120 frames here, stretch this out so that it fits the window. Okay, so it's 120. If I made this, just so you can see, 250, stretch it out, now it fits. 120, good to go. All right, so now I need to make a new camera. So every time we're moving around, as I spin, zoom in, come out, move, track, whatever, that's moving a camera. We can't see it, but right now I'm inside of a camera. But I don't like to use the camera I'm in. I want to make a new one. So I click on this guy, and I say, make a brand new camera. So now I have a brand new camera. And just so we can see it, there's my brand new camera. Okay. So right now as I'm spinning around one camera looking at a different camera. If I click on this, oops, now I'm inside the camera. Okay, and I'm moving around inside the camera. If I click that off, I'm out of the camera. Okay, so just be aware that I'm inside the camera, I'm out of the camera. I'm out. All right, now these little dots right here on the side, that's what's going to render. Okay, so when I render this out, it's going to crop it right there. We'll set up that later on to see exactly where it's going to go. For this assignment, we're just know that it's there. Okay. So I'm going to zoom out a touch, and my room looks small. Like we're inside of our 3D room, so it's going to look small because of how we built it. But what I want to do is make it appear to look bigger than it currently is. So over here in the camera settings, I could adjust the focal length. If you've ever taken a photography class, focal length is typically your zoom. So if you have like a 200 millimeter focal length, you're typically really far away zooming in on something. If you have like an 8 millimeter focal length, it's like a fisheye. Okay, so the smaller this is, the bigger stuff typically appears. So if I put this to 15 and then I zoom into my room, you can see how far away these bookshelves look. If I put this to 200 and I zoom way back out, oops, that might have been too aggressive. Oops, that's even more. Let's go to 120. There we go. It's all flat. Zoom in, come on. All right, still too aggressive. Let's go with 60. There we go. Okay. So now everything appears. What is with this wall? I am outside the room. I just want to get. There we go. All right. You get the idea. Now everything looks really squished, right? So 120, obviously, don't go that high. So I'm going to set this to like 20 because I want to have some perspective in there, but I don't want it to be crazy like at 5 where it looks insane. All right. So the idea with this is we want to show off the work that we've done inside of our scene. What we don't want to do is make people sick, and we don't want to just kind of discount the work that we've done. So I know that most of my work is on this wall here and that wall. So I'm going to start off kind of back here like that. and I'm going to set a keyframe on my camera. Now all of my keyframes are under this coordinates. Okay, that's where we'll be setting keyframes. So as I move my camera around, you can see that this position is updating. As I rotate, these are updating. Okay. So I'm going to kind of line up my camera where I want this to start. I'm going to make sure that I'm on frame 0, and then the keyframing is pretty sweet. You just click and drag. Boop and boop. Okay, so that sets a keyframe for all those attributes right there. So now at frame 0, that's what my camera is going to see. When I go up to frame 120, I'm going to zoom in. Let's say I want to zoom in on my screen or something like that. Okay, I add another keyframe, and so now between here and here you can see that I get that animation. Okay, now here's what I don't want. I'm going to go to frame 37. I'm going to say I want to show off those flamingos, and then we add a key, and then we go to frame 75 and say, oh, my desks, my bookcases, I want to show those off too. Show those off. And then we'll go up a little more and say, oh, that trash can. I spend a lot of time in that trash can. Zoom out, show the trash can. There's trash in it too. Someone in the other class put papers in there, so it's kind of neat. And then maybe here, oh, let me show off, the light. I'm going to show off that light too. All right. So now what I did was I'm going to make you sick in like 2 seconds. So I hit play and look at it. Whoa. Okay. Now keep in mind this is 4 to 5 seconds of animation. So watching this you would just go crazy. We don't want that. I'm already getting sick. So inside of our timeline you'll see there's little purpley bluey little ticks. Those are all our keyframes. So here's how simple it is. You click on it and you hit delete. You click on it and hit delete. Click on it, hit delete. Come on. Delete. Click on it, hit delete. There we go. So now I'm back to where I was before. Okay. Now if I don't like my camera move, like this is actually kind of a weird camera move where I'm getting maybe a little bit too much of the left wall, it's fine to go into like, let's say the halfway mark and maybe just scoot it over a bit. Okay. Click on my camera again, reset my keyframes. So now what's going to happen is my camera just kind of swing around a little bit different. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's good enough for what we're doing. Right? I'm not getting anyone sick. We're not changing speeds. We're not going crazy. It's just going off to the side and coming in. That's what all it's doing, showing off the work. Now we could do other stuff too. I can make, let's say, another new camera. I'll look through this one now. And let's say all my stuff is just on one wall. Okay, well I'm going to go back to frame 0, set a key, go up to 120, and maybe just wipe across to the other side. Oops, and set a key. Set a key. That's how you go from After Effects into Cinema. There you go. And I also play, there we go. So there's nothing wrong with that either, just kind of going from, again, one side to the other. I'm sneezing. All right. So find a good camera move that shows off your work, doesn't make people sick. Okay. That's all we have to do. Now I'm going to get out of this camera just so we can see it. But as I'm setting keyframes for cameras, look at what it's doing. It's putting a trail inside of here, which is pretty sweet because then we could edit that trail if we needed to, right? I could click this point and move it to wherever I needed to. Typically, you don't do this with a camera, but for an object, we would/could. Okay. So it has a trail there. Don't mess with the trail. Just leave it alone. Cool. So we lit our scene. We textured our scene. We animated a camera in it. If you have items in your scene that maybe you want to animate also, you could do that too. I have no problem with that. If you want to animate the trash can just shaking from side to side for some reason, it's the same process. You go back to the beginning, you set some keyframes, you go up a little bit, scoot it over, set some keyframes. Go up a little bit, scoot it over, set some keyframes. So now for whatever reason, the trash can does that. Okay? And if you want to get rid of them, like I said, you can just click and, oops, delete. There we go. No more animation on the trash can. All right, so that's cool. Then the last step that we have to do is actually just set up our rendering and render it out, okay? So we have this here. So this button is our render view, which basically just says, tell me what it's going to look like when it's done. That's what it looks like. This is our render to picture viewer, something different. Don't worry about it yet. And then this other one is our render settings. So on your render settings, you'll need to write this down. Our render settings are 960 by 540. So in output, 960 by 540. These are the amount of pixels left and right and up and down that we're going to be rendering to. Okay, so our final image, once we're done, will be 960 pixels left and right, and then 540 pixels up and down. Okay, we don't care about resolution. Resolution does not mean anything to us because we are not printing these. If this was something that was, let's say, a product, that product was then going to be brought into InDesign, put into an ad, and then printed up, then we would care about resolution, but we don't. Okay, this is a video. It's going to be shown on YouTube or blah, blah, blah. So all we care about are these two numbers. How wide is it? How tall is it in pixels? Okay. Now this came from your TV screen. If you have a relatively newer TV screen, not newest, but newer, it's 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. Okay, this is half of that. So it gives you a good resolution without going crazy. The bigger these two numbers are, the longer it's going to take to render. Okay, so if this was 1920 by 1080, it would basically take you 4 times as long per frame. Just to illustrate that, because why not? 1920 by 1080. Okay, so I made it 1920 by 1080. Let me just close this real quick. I'm going to hit Control R. That wasn't terribly too long. Now let's go a little bit further. Let's lock the ratio, and then we'll go 4096. There we go. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not hitting the other button, which is the right, sure. Which would be actually rendering it. Here it is. See how slow it's going? So now it's rendering off to the side there. That's how long it's actually taking to render and configure this one frame. Okay? So the bigger you go, the longer it's going to take to render. At Pixar and those companies, they render it like 8,000 pixels by 8,000 pixels, and it's just enormous stuff that they're doing. I'm going to close that. Yes, I want to stop it because I don't want to take forever. All right, so 960 by 540 is a good thing for us. We'll leave that. That's all good there. When we come down to our frame range, we want to make sure it's set to render all of our frames, okay? Because we have to make sure it renders frame 0 all the way to 120. If we don't have that set, it'll only render one frame. And you'll think it's all done. It won't be done, okay? And again, these are all things that as you're going through, you're going to say, I need to know the size of it. I need to know how many frames. I need to know where I'm saving it to. Okay, so we have to make sure that we're saving this image. And then it needs to know where it's saving it to. So we click on our stuff. And I made a renders folder inside of my project folder. I gave it a name called Sarcona_room. For this one, I'll just put the underscore in. And then I made sure that it was a TIFF. That's the default there. And then I have to make sure, too, that the naming convention is here. Name.zeros.tiff. Whenever we render these out, what's happening is it goes to our very first frame, and it renders that out, and it saves it. Then it goes to the next frame and renders that out and saves that. And it goes to the next frame and renders that out and saves it. So if we have 120 frames here, we're going to get 120 different images. We have to figure out a way to sequence these. So what it does, it puts a number in it. So what it's going to do is it's going to give it a name, which is Sarcona_room. It's going to put a number. That number is whatever frame it is. So if it's frame 12, this will be 12. And then the extension is a TIFF, so we know it's a TIFF file. Okay? So name.number.extension. The rest of this we can ignore. Under anti-aliasing, we're going to change this from geometry to best. And what this is going to do is it's going to make the edges of our stuff look nicer. Okay? If this is set to none, let's close that. I'll scooch in on some of this stuff. I'll render it out. You can see how blocky this is. See that stepping right there? That's basically because it doesn't know how to figure out what the edges are supposed to look like. We'll say it that way. If I change this to best and I render it out, you can see how now I have a nice smooth line going across there. Okay? So we have to make sure that that is set to best. Everything else in here should be good. I don't think we need any options. Yeah, that's all fine. That's all fine. That's all fine. Yep, and because I have an object glow in my scene, I have this on. If I turn these off, just so you can see, my screen no longer glows. Okay, so some of these things we can actually turn on and off at different intervals. Okay, there we go. Let me save this. All right. So what that last step did is it just set up our settings for what it's going to look like when we render it out. Okay. So now the rendering part, under render, we say add to render queue. And in here, we just have to specify which camera. Because if you look, I have 2 cameras up there. It needs to know which camera are you going to render through. Okay, if I have one camera that sweeps across, I have one camera that zooms in, which camera is it going to render? So I want to make sure I pick the correct one. It's that one. And what render settings? We only have one, so we don't need to change that. And then that's it. So then I come up here and I say go. And then it starts rendering. And what it's going to do is it's going to render frame 1. And it saves it out. Then it goes to frame 2, renders that out. Frame 3, renders that out. Frame 4. And it goes through my entire sequence and renders out the entire sequence. As it's writing it out, it's saving it to 510, work, Miniroom, renders. Here it is. Okay? So as it renders each one of these, here are my images. So this is what I did last week for the other class. Okay? So by the time you're done, you should have one image for every single frame inside of your animation. So imagine that when you go see Toy Story, how long is Toy Story? How many frames per second is that? That's how many frames they're rendering out. And they're rendering out every frame is actually broken apart. So they would have like, here's the background, here's a bunch of frames. Here's Woody, here's Buzz. Here's the shadows for Woody and Buzz. Here's the reflections for Woody and Buzz. It's a lot of stuff. It's like petabytes or whatever it is. Huge amounts of data. All right, so once it's all done in Cinema, it'll say, hey, you're cool, this is all done. Right now I'm on frame 52, 53, whatever it's going. Once it's all done, you're going to come into After Effects. Okay? As a sequence, we can't do anything with a sequence except for open them up in Photoshop or in some sort of viewer. If I want to see what this is looking like, you can right-click on your images and open with DJV. Okay? And DJV allows you to see the sequence played start to end. Okay? So you can make sure your lighting still looks good. You can make sure your cameras are working. Sometimes you pick the wrong cameras and your camera isn't moving. We've had that happen plenty of times. Or you render 120 frames of just like that one wall that your camera was last looking at. So once you've done that, then you can go into After Effects and you're going to double click here. The After Effects part's like the easiest. You grab any image inside of your sequence, make sure this button's clicked, and hit import. Okay? That brings in a sequence. So it has frame 0 all the way to 120. We drag this onto the new comp. We can play it. And then we just export this to a movie. So we just go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. We click on the word lossless. We change this to a QuickTime. Change this to H264. We click on the name, Sarcona _ Miniroom F16. And then we hit render. Okay? And now this will take our sequence from Cinema, put it into an actual QuickTime movie that could then be uploaded to YouTube, played on your TV, brought home to show mom and dad, whatever. Okay? The After Effects part's the quickest. I'll do it again just so you can see it. double click inside of the project folder, grab one of your images, hit import, drag this to the new comp button, and then go to export, add to render queue. Always a QuickTime, always H.264, oops, and then always name it something appropriate, and then hit render. All right. So that's it. So that's your project. That's how you finish up your project. Okay? And then just to cover real quick the turning in process so you can see it, I'm going to close After Effects. I don't want to see that. All done. So this is green. This is green. We're cool. Close it. I'm going to save and just close this. Close this too. Close that too. Close that too. It's never open. See, we're still waiting for that. So here is our folder, right? We set this up at the beginning when we started this. We have renders, scenes, and textures. Inside of my renders is my movie. I lost it. Where'd it go? Oh, it's probably there. There it is. I put it in my finished folder. That's where it should have been. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go to my work folder, and I'm going to copy this to the desktop. Okay. So this is what you're going to do when you turn your stuff in. The desktop version of this, you're going to go into your renders, and you're going to delete all your renders. I don't need any of your rendered images. Okay. And the reason I don't is because your movie has all your stuff. And inside the renders folder, that's where I'm going to drop in that last movie. Okay, so there's no images turned in, just your final movie, your last scene, and then any textures that you used. So then on the Z drive, there's a 2510 folder, there's a Monday, Wednesday Sarcona, there's a Turn In Miniroom. You just drop your folder that you just optimized into that folder. Okay? So then when I grade this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to download this whole folder to my computer. I'm going to watch your movie. Then I'm going to go through your scene and just make sure that you have stuff named, stuff organized. If there's any question as to, I don't really see your desk in here, I can go look at your desk. Okay? For the first one, I'm not very particular on it because it's our practice. Okay? I'm not expecting your desks to look photorealistic or your textures or your lights or anything. This is just getting our feet wet. Just understanding how to navigate inside of Cinema, how to add materials, add lights, animate some stuff, render it out, get it in After Effects and turn it in. So for this one, I'm not very strict on grading the stuff, okay? I really just want to make sure that you've gone through the basic steps so that when we get to the next assignment, you're ready for it, all right? The next assignment will be a bit tougher on grading just because now we have an actual assignment. We have something that needs to come out looking a certain way. And then further and further as we get into the class, we'll be more and more strict on each kind of grading thing, okay?